Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture this with me. It's March 14th, 2025.
Yeah.
All across Delhi, you've got the full explosion of holy festivities happening.
Yeah.
You know, the colors, the music, just total vibrant chaos.
Yeah, the city's buzzing, everyone's celebrating.
Exactly. But then, late that night, maybe around 11:30 p.m., something completely different happens. A fire breaks out. Not, a festive bonfire.
No, this was different. This is in a quiet outhouse, right?
Yeah.
On Tughlaq Road, deep in Luchin's Delhi.
Precisely. At an official residence. And when the firefighters tackle this blaze, they find something. Well, pretty shocking.
More than just charred wood, I take it.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about large bundles of currency notes, partially burnt, lots of them.
Wow. Okay. How much are we talking about?
The estimate floating around is something like 15 crore rupees. That's huge. And it basically turned this festive night completely on its head, sparking this massive judicial controversy.
15 crore in an outhouse. That's quite the discovery.
And it involved a senior judge, didn't it? Justice Yashwant Varma. That's right. And here's the twist. He wasn't even there. He and his wife were miles away in Madhya Pradesh when the whole thing went down.
So he comes back to find, well, a fortune he says isn't his, and suddenly he's in the middle of this huge storm of accusations.
Exactly. His immediate reaction was basically, this is a conspiracy. He was adamant the cash wasn't his, that it must have been planted.
Right. A strong denial from the very beginning sets the stage for a pretty complex situation.
Absolutely. And that's what we really wanted to dig into for you today. We've gone through everything we could find, reports, statements, the inquiry details, to piece together what actually happened.
Trying to make sense of the events, the official investigation, and maybe explore some of the lingering questions.
Yeah, and the implications, too. Because this isn't just about one judge or some burnt money. It touches on judicial integrity, on trust, the whole system, really.
It's a real judicial thriller, in a way. Lots of twists and turns.
Definitely. So let's start unpacking it. Let's go back to that night, Holy Night, March 14th.
Okay, so 11:30 p.m., firefighters are at Justice Varma's place on Tughlaq Road dealing with this fire in the outhouse.
Now, an outhouse, you might just think it's for storage, right? Old files, maybe garden tools, whatever.
Pretty mundane, usually.
But this one suddenly becomes like ground zero for this extraordinary find, these bundles of cash, partially burnt.
And the figure, again, rumored to be around 15 crore rupees, 150 million. It's hard to even picture that much cash, let alone finding it charred in a simple outhouse.
It really is. The image itself is so stark, isn't it? Burnt money, Holy Night, a judge's residence. It feels almost like something out of a movie.
Definitely dramatic. And as you said, Justice Varma and his wife are completely unaware, hundreds of kilometers away.
Yeah, totally blindsided. And when he finds out, his reaction is apparently just utter shock, disbelief.
And that immediate claim, this isn't mine, it's a setup, a conspiracy.
Right, which, immediately puts everything on a very contentious footing.
Understandably. So with a high court judge involved and such a massive amount of cash discovered under, let's say, unusual circumstances, the authorities had to act, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was no way this could just be ignored. The Supreme Court stepped in pretty quickly.
How quick?
Just about a week later, actually. March 22nd, 2025, they formed a special 3-member in-house committee.
An in-house committee. Okay. So judges investigating a judge, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Justices Sheil Nagu, Jia Sandawalia, and Anu Savaraman. A sort of judicial dream team, if you will, tasked with getting to the bottom of it.
Their job was to find out the facts, figure out what really happened with this money.
Precisely. And they worked on it, and their report came out. Well, the writing started around April 27th, 2025, and it landed like a bombshell.
What did it say?
It concluded that the currency, the cash, was placed in that outhouse with Justice Varma's tacit or active consent.
Wow. Tacit or active consent. That's a very serious finding. It implies he either knew or maybe deliberately ignored it.
Exactly. A huge implication. But, and this is a big but, as we started looking into how they reached that conclusion, well, some serious questions started popping up about the inquiry process itself.
Okay, so the conclusion was strong, but the process maybe wasn't so straightforward.
That's putting it mildly, according to some. Senior lawyer Kapil Sibal, who's also a Rajya Sabha member, he analyzed it, and he didn't hold back. He basically called the whole inquiry process flawed, unfair even.
Strong words from someone like Sibal. What were the specific flaws he pointed out?
Well, think about the basics of finding something like this. Why wasn't the cash immediately seized by the police? That seems like step one, right?
Standard procedure, secure the evidence.
Right. And there was no panchnama prepared. You know, that official document that lists exactly what was found and seized at the scene? Nothing.
No record of seizure. That's odd. Very odd.
And it gets weirder. The outhouse itself wasn't even properly cordoned off to preserve potential evidence. Fingerprints, fibers,
Right.
anything?
So the scene wasn't secured.
Apparently not immediately, no. And maybe the most baffling part. No first information report, no FIR was filed.
No FIR. For a potential crime involving potentially illegal cash found after a fire at a judge's residence. That's really surprising.
It's more than surprising, it's a fundamental lapse. It suggests the incident wasn't initially treated as a potential crime scene at all, which just doesn't add up given what was found.
Okay, so major procedural issues right from the start. What about the inquiry itself, the committee's work?
That's where more concerns arise. It seems the inquiry was largely done, well, without Justice Varma's direct participation in key parts.
What do you mean?
He apparently asked repeatedly to be able to cross-examine the witnesses whose statements were being used against him.
The right to face your accusers, basically.
Exactly, a fundamental principle of natural justice. But that request was seemingly denied. He also wasn't given a personal hearing to present his case directly to the committee, despite asking for one.
So, no cross-examination, no personal hearing. But they still reach that conclusion about his tacit or active consent.
That's what the report suggests, yes.
Yeah.
It really raises questions about fairness, about due process. How can you properly defend yourself if you can't challenge the evidence or testimony directly?
It definitely casts a shadow, doesn't it? Okay, what about the practicalities? Like, how did the cash even get into the outhouse? Was it secure?
The keys. This is another really puzzling part. We looked into this, and turns out the keys to that outhouse weren't exactly kept under lock and key by the judge's family alone.
Oh. Who else had access?
It seems they were pretty widely accessible. Other residents on the compound, security staff, personal staff. Quite a few people potentially had access to those keys.
So not exactly Fort Knox.
Not at all. But here's the kicker. The committee seems to have just assumed that the storeroom was solely under the Varma family's control.
Assumed, despite witnesses saying otherwise.
Yes. Apparently, multiple witnesses, the report even names numbers like 31, 32, 34, 35, 40, 46, 47, testified that access was broad. But the committee seems to have disregarded that testimony in favor of their assumption.
Wow. Ignoring direct witness testimony. That's a significant issue in any investigation. It seems like they were maybe working towards a specific conclusion.
One could certainly question it. And then there's the CCTV situation.
Ah, yes. Security cameras, surely they'd show something.
You'd think so. There was a camera in the security room, controlled by the security personnel, not the judge's family, but the hard disk.
Let me guess. It was blank.
According to the Forensic Science Lab report, yes. Blank.
Convenient.
And it gets even more concerning. That hard disk, the potentially crucial footage, it wasn't even sealed as evidence until March 25th.
March 25th. The fire was on the 14th. That's 10, 11 days later.
Exactly. A huge gap. It happened during a spot inspection, well after the event. So you have to ask, what happened in those 10 days? Was the data erased? Could it have been tampered with?
It raises massive questions about evidence preservation, doesn't it? A blank hard drive sealed almost 2 weeks late. It just adds to the feeling that something's not right here.
It really does. But through all of this, Justice Varma himself, he hasn't backed down an inch.
Still maintaining his innocence, still claiming conspiracy.
Absolutely. Adamant the catch wasn't his, he knew nothing about it, and this is all a deliberate frame-up.
Does he offer any counter-evidence or arguments?
Well, he strongly points out that there's zero evidence, none whatsoever, suggesting he or his family tried to remove any cash after the fire.
Which you might expect someone guilty to do, perhaps. Try to get rid of it.
Possibly. And he also highlights the CRPF presence. There were paramilitary personnel providing security on site. Surely, he argues, they would have noticed if someone was trying to sneak out large bundles of cash, especially right after a fire.
That's a fair point. It wouldn't be easy to move that kind of bulk discreetly with security around.
Right. He sees the lack of any such report as supporting his claim. But the committee, they saw things differently.
How so?
They described his conduct as unnatural.
Unnatural? In what way?
Two main things. First, they felt it was odd he didn't personally go and check the outhouse himself on March 15th, the day right after the fire.
But wasn't he just returning from Madhya Pradesh? Wouldn't he be dealing with the shock, the police, the fire aftermath? Is it really unnatural not to immediately inspect a burnt-out storage shed?
It seems like a strange expectation, doesn't it? And second, they pointed to his lack of protest regarding his subsequent transfer to the Allahabad High Court.
Wait, he was transferred And they saw his lack of protest as suspicious.
Apparently so. As if not fighting a transfer somehow implies guilt about the burnt cash. It feels like, well, like setting a new, very specific and maybe unfair standard for how a judge is supposed to react in such an unprecedented crisis.
Yeah, it sounds like interpreting his actions or lack thereof through a lens of presumed guilt almost. Very subjective.
It does seem that way. And this whole case, understandably, has caused huge ripples.
I can imagine. Within the legal world especially.
Definitely. Lawyers' associations spoke out quite strongly, questioning how fair the inquiry really was.
Any specific examples?
The Allahabad High Court Bar Association, for instance, they didn't just issue a statement, they went on an indefinite strike.
A strike? Wow. Why?
They were protesting Justice Varma's transfer, which they were convinced was directly linked to this whole controversy. They saw it as an attack on judicial independence.
So a significant part of the bar felt he was being unfairly targeted because of this incident.
That was certainly their expressed view. Now, to be fair, the Supreme Court did make some moves towards transparency.
Like what?
They actually released the inquiry report to the public. And not just the report, but also photos, even videos, apparently, of the charge notes.
Okay. That's something, I'll suppose. An attempt to show they weren't hiding the core findings, at least.
Right. But transparency also means context comes out. And it's worth mentioning, though it's from the past, that Justice Varma had been named in a 2018 CDI FIR.
Oh, related to what?
It was about a bank fraud case involving Symbiote sugar mills, where he'd been a non-executive director years ago.
Was he directly implicated or charged in that?
No, not directly implicated in the wrongdoing itself, as far as the reports go. But you know how it is. His name being connected to a past financial investigation, however tangential, inevitably adds another layer to the public discussion when something like this happens.
Sure, it becomes part of the background noise, part of the narrative people construct, fairly or unfairly.
Exactly. Which brings us to the bigger picture here. This whole affair, it really goes beyond Justice Varma himself.
You mean the implications for the judiciary as a whole?
Precisely. Remember Kapil Sibal's comment? He didn't just call the inquiry flawed. He voiced this really grave concern that this whole thing could be an attempt to, in his words, decimate judicial independence.
Decimate judicial independence. Those are incredibly strong words.
Yeah.
But you can see why someone might fear that, right? If a judge can be embroiled in something like this with so many procedural questions.
It sends a chilling message, potentially. In a democracy, the judiciary needs to be that independent check, that final arbiter. If that independence seems vulnerable, it's a serious concern.
Absolutely. And has sparked wider debates about reforms.
Yes, it really has. It's brought things like the NJHAC, the National Judicial Appointments Commission, back into the conversation.
Right. The body proposed to change how judges are appointed, which the Supreme Court itself struck down a while back.
Exactly. The debate over judicial appointments versus government involvement is reignited. And maybe more directly relevant here, there's been a much louder call for mandatory public asset declarations for all judges.
Making judges declare their assets publicly, like politicians have to.
Yes. It's common practice in many other countries, but not universally mandatory here. This case, finding undeclared cash, even if contested, makes the argument for that kind of transparency much stronger, doesn't it?
It certainly highlights why people are calling for it. It's about public trust, ultimately.
Fundamentally. But even with the inquiry, the report, the public debate, there are still some huge gaping holes in this story, questions that just haven't been answered.
Like what? What are the big unknowns?
Well, for starters, what was the exact amount of cash? We keep hearing the estimate, 15 crore. But has anyone actually counted it? Confirmed it? Where's the official tally?
Good point. An estimate isn't the same as a confirmed figure.
And perhaps the biggest mystery of all, who took the burnt notes away? We know they were there on the night of the fire. But then what?
Someone must have removed them, right? The day after, March 15th, someone must have handled that cash.
You'd think so. But the Delhi police say they don't have it. They deny recovering it, and Justice Varma denies knowing where it is.
So the crucial evidence, the burnt money itself, it's just missing.
It seems that way. It's baffling.
Yeah.
Where did potentially 15 crore rupees in burned cash go? The silence on that is just deafening. It leaves this massive question mark hanging over the entire affair.
A multi-million rupee question mark, quite literally. That's incredible.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear this is so much more than just a weird story about money catching fire. It's really a tangled web, isn't it? Involving trust, accountability, how power works,
and the very integrity of the judicial system. Justice Varma's guilt or innocence, that's still really unclear, shrouded in all these questions and procedural issues.
Definitely ambiguous. But the case itself forces us to ask some hard questions. Can our system really handle allegations like this, especially against its own, with total fairness, with transparency?
Can it withstand that kind of internal scrutiny and maintain public confidence? That seems to be the core issue.
It does. And it leaves us, and you, with a really critical thought to chew on, doesn't it?
Which is?
If the very systems we have in place to protect judicial integrity, the inquiries, the procedures, if those systems themselves seem flawed or are called into serious question, like in this case, what does that mean for justice itself, for the foundations we rely on?
Yeah, if the safeguards look shaky, what does that say about what they're supposed to be guarding?
Exactly. And maybe how far should we, as a society, push for answers? How much scrutiny is needed to ensure the truth comes out, unburnt and untainted, especially when it involves the guardians of justice themselves?
A profound question indeed. How do you ensure accountability at the highest levels, especially when the system investigates itself? It's a dilemma at the heart of this whole controversy.